Oh, what's up? March 4th, March forward 2021. And that's what we need to do despite the market. Okay, so today was kind of crazy. I mean, every day in the near term has been kind of crazy, right, with the market. And let's just, I'm going to get to the main point of this video, but let's just, let's reflect on what's kind of going on the market overall. But you probably kind of can get a hint from the image that I have on the screen right now as to the main crux of the market volatility today, and that's the semiconductor shortage. Okay, so apparently the stay-at-home thing for tech went so well that we forgot about the hardware. Everyone's thinking about Zoom, everyone's thinking about Netflix and all the software, all the distributed computing, all that stuff on the cloud that's expanding, and that tech throughout the last year really had shored themselves up and risen up to recently in strength and power and earnings. But the thing is, you need something to run. Whether you run your software in the cloud or when you run it on your local machine or on your phone, you need something physically to run software on. We don't have software connected brains yet, right? And we don't install software to our brains. Though one day, pretty soon, maybe Elon Musk will make that a reality. But the issue is we run against the limit of hardware. And what that means, a limit of hardware, and that means the semiconductors, the chips, the silicon, the boards that are used to construct the platforms that the software runs on, even on the cloud, are in short supply. And I guess people have really started freaking out about this today. So they've been freaking out for it for a little while about it for a little while. But I do want to show you the SOXX index, which is the semiconductor index. It's one of those iShares indices. And look, there was a sharp drop today after a very, 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 very strong, whoa, very strong, what is Yahoo Finance doing? A very strong, since April, since the dip from last year, a very strong rise. Okay, so, and it was bound to happen because people have been staying at home. People have been buying more computers, more powerful phones, been buying gaming consoles, been buying streaming devices of all kinds. And one thing that, so I'm an engineer in my background, and one thing, and an electrical engineer at that, / computer engineer, and one thing that some people think, even though that we have, commodity levels of hard drive space now, we're getting to the point where we have tons of memory and RAM available, we're still limited by the amount of silicon we can craft through photolithography into devices, right? The chips, it takes quite a while and a lot of complex processing to turn a batch of silicon, which is, rock, right? To turn that into a functional microprocessor, or into any other several kinds of other chips that that computers and phones need. And that lead time, which I've heard, is in some cases, even in our advanced state, we've been relying on semiconductors for quite a long time, right? And even now, up to now, like the most advanced semiconductor processes can take 26 weeks to get from ingot, right, silicon ingot, which is the raw silicon material, to chip, right? And there's a lot of stages in between. There's etching, there's photochemical etching, there's fabrication in a clean environment, which requires a fab lab, right? A foundry, semiconductor foundry, and and several steps in between, and quality assurance, quality testing that requires that. That is required to be done before the semiconductor chip is ready for the prime time, right? Otherwise it's still just a hunk of rock. And even just talking about this all brings me back to my engineering days about how semiconductors work. It's really interesting. And point, but there's a lot of a lot of, and it's relevant too because so. Um, Semiconductors essentially, for those uninitiated, some of you probably already know, but semiconductors basically have have a limit, which is the industry goal to overcome almost every single year in how far apart you can space the chips, right? At least in the 2D plane. And the limit when I first started working on computers when I was in school years ago was we were at the 20, 23 limit, semiconductor limit. So the thing is, if I can find a good picture, semiconductor, every year, semiconductor companies like Intel, TSMC, they all try to get these semiconductor chips closer together, right? These gates. And the thing is, there's a quantum mechanical limit, right? See, that's why this is. There is there is a fundamental limit on how close you can pack semiconductors together, right? And right now, TSMC, a Taiwanese company, is at, they're almost ready with their 5 nanometer technology. But the whole thing is, this is where these are the leading edge semiconductor chips, and every year, I mean, this process, the new 7 millimeter, there was 7 millimeter process is currently the standard in the highest bleeding edge. The 14 nanometer process is, I think, what most of industry uses around the world, which is not bleeding edge, and then 10 millimeter is where I think Intel has gotten up to, and they want to move lower to 7, but they haven't done that yet, if I remember. But the thing is, at some point when remember, and also nanometers, right? Nanometers is very tiny, right? At that point, you're dealing with atoms. You're on the atomic scale. So when you get two atoms close to each other, for those of you who understand quantum mechanics, right? You start to run into band band gap issues. You start to run into places where you have something called tunneling, quantum tunneling occurring, that the electron can exist in one chip or the other, right? And semiconductors rely on electrons to function, right? Electricity runs the processes, and so if you have quantum mechanical tunneling, you'll leak electricity from one chip to another, and there you go. That's the issue. So, well, anyway, that's a little bit of a segue into how semiconductors work and like what is essentially the processing goal. And these are everybody, all the chips that are being made, all the companies putting out chips want to evolve to the fastest, smallest gap spacing between semiconductor chips as fast as possible, and obviously they want the most performance out of their machines. But the problem is, again, these are complex processes, and we are bottlenecked by how many of these chips that we can output at any one time. There's silicon is one of the most abundant elements in the crust of the earth, but formatting them into a usable semiconductor process is quite expensive. So the thing is, what's happened, it's finally caught up with us. And something I want to talk about real quickly is there's a few articles. This Forbes article is really interesting to me. And it's talking about how really, so it started off being signaled with GM saying that they're going to extend closing. They're not gonna reopen because there's a shortage of semiconductors for cars, right? And the entire auto industry in general said that there's going to be 700,000 fewer cars in 2021, and that prompted Biden to sign off on a major review of supply chains that deliver key products for most U.S. industries and markets. So. Because really one of the core issues is most of our semiconductors in the world, the leading edge ones, are made in TSMC, which is a Taiwanese company. And basically, they control the supply chain. There's many other companies that, have supply chains, that have fab labs, but a semiconductor lab, a foundry, is quite expensive to maintain. It's not very flexible. system, and you have to constantly upgrade it. Lots of electricity and power requirements, lots of clean room requirements, and you can't just pop them out like you can pop out new, more advanced software. Okay, so you really will have to. Intel and all these companies, like they do what they can with what they have, right? But again, many issues. A lot of our processing is going on in China. A lot of our chip manufacturing companies, Apple makes their chips in China. Samsung, I believe they're making chips in the U.S. now. They intend to open up chip in a chip manufacturing plant in the U.S. But again, no time. I don't think there's a timeline on that. And overall, again, when it does go up and running, that's one plant, right? One fab lab. Like these labs, like pump out billions of chips all the time, and even that is a characteristic of a supply constrained industry, and people are going to be wanting to stay at home more. They're going to be wanting, like I've heard somewhere like now we're going to get a 3-day work week, so that's going to give a lot of needs an extra day to play video games, and that means they're going to want faster consoles, more cartridges, more game software, more DLC, more cloud computing. Like, it's just, think about it, the entire world being connected through silicon, right? And so the other issue is like China, right? China and Taiwan. China is going to cause problems here because China wants Taiwan, culturally, but they also want Taiwan to, you know, they want Taiwan to, they want Taiwan's semiconductor manufacturing capacity because China, the world's, most populous country, biggest country, has more and more people who can afford smartphones and can afford gaming console technology and whatnot, and they're going to want to be the industry leaders in this area, so they're going to cause supply chain issues. This is what I was saying here. The Samsung is also making chips using the 7-nanometer process and is building a factory in the U.S. in Austin, Texas. However, most of Samsung's chips go into their devices. And yeah, Samsung is going to want to maintain control of their... See, this is a market where it's not ubiquitous, right? It's it's not very there's monopolistic, even though there's no monopoly per se. There's only a few companies. There's an oligarchy of companies that contribute to the semiconductor space. So really, what's going to happen is that um, you know you're going to have and Global Foundries is they're using 14 nanometer chips, and they will not invest in 10 nanometers in the future. I'm not sure why, but I guess they're the more ubiquitous manufacturer. But all I can say is that uh, this article, basically, this is the one of the more important points. The fundamental point that needs to be addressed in the long term is how to keep foundry competition alive. I believe Intel is critical to that future, which is why the industry needs to be concerned with Intel's future, whether the company buys chips from Intel or not, because Intel is US based, right? And you really need a U.S. first policy if the U.S. is going to be able to meet the demand of all the people who want more devices. So anyway, the SOX index, as I was showing you, had a huge decline. Okay, well, relatively large, because of the supply constraint nature. But you think this is a very demand-driven economy right now, and we're compounded with the tech stocks, right? We're compounded with issues in the tech sector. Okay, even go to the general markets. Let's look at today. Look at this, like Dow correction, 78. S&P, Nasdaq. Look at all these nasty corrections that happened today. Multiple, how many points down was the Nasdaq? How many points down was the S&P? Again, and this is just a series of declines over the entirety of the week. Each of these candles is just like for the last week, right? It's not. We're not in a fun time right now, right? So here's the issue. We're going to have to uh, that's just tech in general, right? So tech, the hardware component, the overheated nature caused by worsened by interest rates increase. We hit the bond market hitting at take a look. We're at 1.578%. We've crossed the 1.5 barrier, right, for the bond yield, 10-year bond yield, and that means that bond investment is going to go through the roof, right? Because the yield is going higher. That's going to cause high earning stocks to suffer, and as people rotate more into the growth stocks, I mean, at some point the growth stocks are going to be the high earning stocks that cause inflation. I mean, that's the thesis, right, or a working thesis. Fed chairman came out today, said some things, right? They're going to be dovish on the economy. They're going to be dovish in their reaction, right? So that means they're reluctant to raise interest rates. Okay. They don't. They. I think Jeremy Powell mentioned that the fear of inflation is real today. So there was a question on that, inflation or not. I even asked that in my video yesterday, and inflation is real. So let's just quickly go over the semiconductor shortage a little.
Semiconductors are the brains that power technology, and right now
they're not the brains. Well, they're part of it, right? I mean, the brain maybe you can consider it a substrate for the brain. The neural networks, the programs, the way the neurons interact. That's the brain. Whatever.
There is a massive shortage of those brains. Josh Lipton is taking a look at how we got here and what it means for some key industries. And Josh, every morning we hear about more industries and more companies that are being impacted.
Yeah, Becky, that's right. This is the most severe shortage of semiconductors in years. That's how analysts are describing this chip crunch to me. So what's the reason for this?
Interesting. You didn't hear about that like yesterday, really? Unless you were paying attention to the market. I mean, there's people who are specialized to study the semiconductor industry, analysts, semiconductor analysts, and they do this, financial analysts, they do this all day. But, you like in the mainstream, you don't really hear a peep about that. All you heard was the bond market and the tech crunch, so to speak.
Tech analyst Patrick Moorhead chalks it up to sharp recovery in key end markets for chips.
That's what I was saying.
Phones and cars, and no let up in that work from home trend either. That means people still buying all those PCs. Bottom line, pressure on supply across the board, and there is
so one could think that this is a good sign in a way, right? Because that is a sign of recovery, but recovery is quite volatile, as a lot of people are learning this year. Recovery is not a straight line, and people who are invested in growth stocks are now losing money, and as their investment managers are rotating their money over to the cyclicals and things like that. I mean, this is a volatile market, and normalization, we just learned, now has a new bar, right? It has the semiconductors to worry about, a new long pole here.
There's no easy fix here. Making a semiconductor is complex. Lead times of up to 26 weeks are the norm to produce a finished chip. Companies feeling the pinch. GM announcing it's extending a temporary shutdown.
This is what caused really the hoopla. And I mean, Biden signed an executive order to study this, right? Well, I don't know what that's going to really do in the long run, but people are going to. It's going to cause an economic shuffle, right? Like maybe people might invest more in. The direct plausible impact is that people might invest more in foundries in the U.S., right? Like in Ohio or wherever, the foundries exist in Texas, wherever, the knowledge exists to build those out. But, other than that, like really, I mean, what would be nice and ideal is that somebody figured out a way to enhance the manufacturing process for semiconductors beyond beyond the narrowing of the band gap, or the narrowing of the semiconductor gap, right? I mean, we need to start looking into faster processing or faster fabrication. And that's again a very complex thing because you're dealing with quantum physics there.
Plants due to the chip shortage, and telling analysts on the morning call that the shortage could cost up to $2 billion this year. Sony says it can't produce enough new game consoles, again citing that same issue. Patrick Moorhead says the problem highlights the need for more domestic chip manufacturing right here in the U.S. if we want to try and avoid this problem in the future. Last month, remember, Congress did pass legislation that included federal incentives to do just that as part of the National Defense Authorization Act, but lawmakers still need to appropriate funding.
See, that's the thing. Funding still has to be appropriated towards this, so it's just an example of, lawmakers always being behind the ball, I think this should have been in the eyes of lawmakers for a while. I mean, but again, they're not industry experts they're not industry experts in technology, right? As many of the trials of like tech executives over the past few years have indicated. So, um,
For those measures. Back to you, Becky.
Hey, Josh, you said lead time can be up to 26 weeks. Are we talking half a year before we catch up with this, or is it going to take even longer?
Yeah, there is no easy fix here. There is no switch you can just flip. Making a semiconductor can be costly, it can be complex, and it can take a long time. And that's why you're seeing these effects across the chip space. But it affects companies, in different ways. I was actually talking to Bernstein's Stacy Rasgon, and Stacy, of course, covers that sector. And there's all kinds of ways in his universe that he's seeing, right? So Qualcomm, for example, they recently reported results. They are supply constrained. That stock is down about 10% since that print. On the other hand, though, there's names like NXPI.
See, it's interesting because stocks that are supply constrained, like Qualcomm, you would think that there would be demand for them, so people would be giving them money. But they're supply constrained in a bad way, in the sense that there's no matter what you do, they're not going to be able to catch up, which means their profits are going to be affected, right? And the upstream is going to be affected. The downstream is going to change. It's dependent on them. So, they're the bottleneck, right? No one wants to be a bottleneck. And people would give them money to not be the bottleneck if it was physically possible, right? But then I've heard of companies like Micron and other companies that are really trying to fill this gap, I think by possibly, selling budget semiconductors. I mean, you're going to have to work with what you can, right? I mean, if the manufacturing process, it bears some research, right? Like if we'll be going back to budget semiconductors. Would 14 millimeter nanometer band gaps be the solution? Who knows? Anyway, that's what I wanted to talk about today. Hopefully, that's some food for thought, something you can chew on. Like, subscribe, and happy investing. None of this is financial advice, by the way. This is just all my research and current understanding of the industry. I just want to share my thoughts and hope you make some money. All right, see you around. Oh, what's up? March 4th, March forward, 2020.